Thank you so much for tuning in. Good morning or afternoon or evening, wherever you might be. Very pleased and honored to have this group of people here today and this lineup of guest speakers here to join us in this important dialogue. My name is Tim Hamrich. I am in the U.S. in Idaho. I'm a consultant, and about 6 years ago, I started a weekly podcast called Future of Agriculture to host conversations a little bit like the one we're having here today in this final session, which is all of this interesting innovation that's coming to food and agriculture. What does it mean, and how can we make sure that the benefits from this technology get to those who can benefit from them the most? As most people who are tuned in here today know, that the extreme progress that has been made through the Green Revolution is still not yet complete in all parts of the world. And meanwhile, we have these emerging technologies, these innovations that have the potential to boost productivity and reduce our need for inputs and maybe lessen our reliance on things like mechanization and chemistry. And how does all that fit together? How does all that get to those who can stand to benefit from most, specifically smallholder farmers in lower middle income countries? So that's what we're going to talk about here today. It's a big topic. It's a lot to engage in, but I think what we have in store for you here today is going to not only foster great conversation in the session, but also an ongoing dialogue about these important issues. So today we'll highlight some of the technologies that are best positioned to benefit smallholder farmers. We'll examine some of the pitfalls and challenges. This is real talk format, right? So what is the hard part about this? What are the pitfalls, right? And then provoke this dialogue that I talked about, how all ag stakeholders can play a role in this fourth agricultural revolution, what we'll call Ag 4.0 here in today's conversation. So I'm excited about it. I'm also really excited about the format. So we're going to have a fireside chat to start off with, followed by a combination of both presentation and dialogue, and would encourage you to also engage and get your questions asked and hopefully answered. We'll get to as many of them as we possibly can here today. But we're going to start off with a fireside chat. I'm very honored to be joined here by Jim Barnhart. Jim is the assistant to the administrator at USAID RFS. Jim, can you hear me?
Absolutely, Tim.
Thank you so much for being on the session here today.
Well, and you know what, Tim, I appreciate what you're doing in terms of a podcast on such an important topic. So I'm honored to be joining you here today and with the global audience.
Absolutely. And maybe just to start, provide us a little bit of background on yourself. How did you get to the position you're in here today?
Sure. I am a career senior Foreign Service officer. Have been working with the U.S. Agency for International Development for the past 22 years now. My area of study at PhD is in economics, and I have spent my career, the vast majority of my career, overseas in Africa, Asia, and in Europe, and in many of those places. Agriculture was a centerpiece to the work that we did. And so I was absolutely thrilled when in June of 2020, I returned from Jordan, where I was heading the mission, to head up the newly reformed Bureau for Resilience and Food Security here at USAID, and also take on the role of deputy coordinator for our US government's Feed the Future program.
Fantastic. And maybe talk a little bit about that work that USAID's doing in food security and in agriculture.
Absolutely, absolutely, Tim. Before I do that, if it's all right with you, I'd like to at least pause and I think we can all agree that our thoughts are with the people of Ukraine at this time, experiencing a situation that none of us thought possible, and certainly all of our thoughts and prayers go to them. And as we gather here, Tim, and we think about agriculture and food security, we know that a global disruption in both the supply and price of commodities is coming our way due to the war that's currently taking place in Ukraine. And so I'm confident that, and so I'd like the audience, as we talk through this and as the other speakers go through their various points of view, that we think through how we contextualize this discussion with what we know is coming to be the biggest global food crisis since 2008. And in fact, I fear that it might be worse than 2008 in terms of price spikes, supply disruptions, and fertilizer costs particularly rising as well, right? So pause there. Just if we can think about that as we talk through, I would love to hear how it goes through the rest of the day, because I'm confident that the knowledge, technology, and digital tools that we've been talking about, and we'll talk about later on this afternoon, can help mitigate a lot of these negative effects that are coming our way due to the Ukraine war. So turning to your question, more than a century ago, USAID set out to fulfill President Kennedy's charge to catalyze newly developing countries with self-sustained growth. And agriculture was the key to this endeavor, with USAID pushing the frontiers of innovation to develop and advance best practices in agriculture and rural development. So after helping champion the Green Revolution that more than doubled yields for staple crops, we at USAID continued at the forefront of advances in agriculture, harnessing new technologies and strategies to boost productivity and better the lives of rural people. Transform government's role in that, being a facilitator rather than an inhibitor of growth, and partner with the private sector to magnify impact. I'm sure this might be quite interesting news for folks, but it was William Dodd, who was then in the 1960s, was the USAID administrator. He is the one that coined the term Green Revolution. He described it as the rapid advances in more intensive and productive agriculture that brought record yields to wheat in Pakistan, India, and Turkey, and rice in the Philippines. And it was propelled by a breakthrough in publicly bred varieties. And this remarkable speech that he gave to the Society for International Development in 1968 was where he coined the term Green Revolution. And it's been the guide to our USAID food security programs that have positively impacted more than 3 billion people since then. So many of the advances of the Green Revolution were started much earlier under Ford and under the Ford and Rockefeller Foundations. They had breeding programs at the International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center, CIMMYT, in Mexico, and in the International Rice Research Institute, the IRRI, in the Philippines. And Norman Borlaug, a key researcher at CIMMYT, became known as the father of the Green Revolution. And he received a Nobel Peace Prize for this in 1970. And USAID continued to support those research centers and expanded support to other centers that formed what we now call the Consultative Group on International Agriculture Research, or the unfortunately acronym CGIAR, which I have a really hard time saying in speeches. So I try to avoid that acronym as often as I can, because I trip over myself with that I sitting uncomfortably.
You have a lot of
in the middle
acronyms to keep up with.
Exactly. And my life is acronyms as a U.S. government employee. But USAID co-leads the interagency in the implementation of our whole of government, our whole of U.S. government Feed the Future initiative. And its idea is to ensure that farms are more efficient and productive with less impact on the environment through better information from computers, remote sensing, coupled with improved data on pests, disease, weather, and markets. And understanding plant and animal genomes and using precision breeding tools combined with better knowledge regarding markets, weather, and downstream actors, we know that we can improve yields and increase incomes for smallholder farmers and this associated businesses around the world. So since its inception, Feed the Future, in 2010, the initiative has helped over 23 million people lift themselves out of extreme poverty. 3.4 million children are not stunted, and 5.2 million more families live free from hunger. So we've made some progress, but boy, there's a lot more to go, a lot further to go, right? But with new research and new technologies, Feed the Future is supporting the promise of dealing with challenges of climate change, conservation of water and the environment, nourishing a growing population, and being an engine of economic growth. It's imperative that, just as with the Green Revolution, USAID is investing in making sure this fourth ag revolution is in the making, is going to take account of equitable growth. It really needs to be equitable. It needs to embrace and allow marginalized populations to be able to step in and enjoy the fruits of this technology. So we're really pushing that. I'm sorry, I spoke too long there. Okay, I'll pass it back to
No,
you.
you didn't. No, you didn't at all. I was eating it up. In fact, taking a lot of notes here. It sounds like technology has always been kind of a central driver to this work that you're doing. When did digital technology sort of become like, we realized that digital technology was going to play a role in kind of getting to the next level, and how does that contribute to this Feed the Future program?
Well, digital technologies, let's face it, they've already shown great promise, right? Providing farmers with information, extension, and advisory services. It's enabling them to be more efficient, and it's also helping on the financial advisory front, right? Getting financial services in the hands of people who in the past didn't have access, and it's facilitating connections between buyers and sellers. The U.S. government's global food security strategy elevates the enormous potential for emerging technologies to transform parts of the food system through efficiency gains, predictive capacity, and reduced waste. And the potential is huge. Experts estimate that by 2025, 500 million people will gain access to mobile phones, with underserved markets in Asia and sub-Saharan Africa accounting for the majority of those new subscribers. All of these gains in access will open up even more opportunities to effectively leverage digital technologies in the agriculture sector by expanding the number of individuals who can benefit from existing technologies, as well as to the introduction of new technologies and models for delivering services digitally. So as we move into this fourth agriculture revolution, digital technologies are going to help improve the agriculture productivity and overall market inclusion, then lifting livelihoods of smallholder farmers and their families and others in the food system. So it's going to lead to a data-driven decision-making process at a really small scale. And it can level the playing field and reduce asymmetric information throughout the market. So that it's not just the big players, the big corporates that have that information, but it's going to democratize that information. So under the right circumstances, digital tools can serve to democratize knowledge and access to all kinds of information. Thus, to the extent we can promote scale neutrality around digital tools, we can help both improve productive potential and reduce risk all along the food system. And that's from farm to fork. Already, digital technologies are supporting Feed the Future's programs, not to mention the programs of other donors and government agencies in a number of key ways. Through digitalization of advisory and extension services, for instance, we're delivering information on shifting conditions such as weather, pests, disease, or market prices. And all of that can help smallholder farmers and other market actors make informed decisions during key parts of the productive cycle, right? It happens throughout. And a great example of this is the work that we've supported through our Developing Local Extension Capacity Project. Again, I don't even want to bother you with the acronym, but that project, I mentioned this in my opening remarks yesterday, supported women dairy farmers to reduce their milk spoilage to near zero through instructional videos that help guide them, and then it boosts their income and their nutrition levels for them and their families. And digital technologies are improving market connections by linking buyers and sellers in more efficient and transparent ways, which has been particularly accelerated during the pandemic. For example, in Nepal, Feed the Future partnered with 2 e-commerce marketplaces to help farmers bring agriculture products to market. And within its first year, close to 1,000 farmers were able to sell more than 1.5 million Nepali rupees online. That wasn't happening before the pandemic, right? That was right. So 1.5 million Nepali rupees online just in the course of less than a couple of years. So it was a smart but important transformation that we think we can continue to scale. Now it's helping to improve supply chain management, from traceability to farmer management, and facilitate access to more affordable and accessible financial services from savings to payment to credit and insurance, right, across the board. So in Kenya, we have a program there that has combined satellite imagery, Internet of Things, water sensors, mobile money to provide, and mobile money that all together provide rural Kenyans with improved access to water services. So in addition to all of these cases, we're excited about the potential of next generation technologies, from artificial intelligence to blockchain to virtual reality and beyond. And we see these as all coming together to hypercharge these, our work. And whether it's in terms of finally delivering on the promise of precision agriculture at the smallholder level, to introducing deeply immersive learning experiences, or revolutionizing record keeping and cross-border payments. I think it's going to be particularly important given the supply chain disruptions that we're seeing right now coming out of the invasion of Ukraine. So at the same time, we also recognize the potential risk that digital technologies can introduce. Whether that's privacy, security flaws, harassment, especially of girls and women, mis and disinformation. Unfortunately, we're seeing more and more of that at a global scale, and the economic implications that come from an uneven distribution of access to and ownership of these technologies. These potential risks must be front and center in our minds, particularly for those of us who are funding and trying to support these around the world as development organizations. But if we can address those as we move forward, I think the benefits will far outweigh those potential risks.
Yeah, and on
Sorry,
that last,
again, I think I'm talking way too much there.
No, not at all. I really appreciate it. I really like the dairy extension group example, because I think something that we'll probably talk about again today is, it's about the technology, sure, but it's also about the context you can create around that technology to actually implement it in a way that's going to, make a difference. And so that I thought was a great example of that. And I also like about this that these technologies don't have to happen in a linear way where you adopt one, then you adopt another. There can be sort of this leapfrog effect to some of the very technologies that sound very almost futuristic that you're talking about.
So Tim, this is when you've been in the business a while. I can remember in 2003-4 and being in Zambia as the mobile phone industry started to go big, right? Started to scale. And I remembered talking with people about how we needed to use those kind of technologies to help developing countries just forget about laying, the Ma Bell, the type of wires. Let's just go right into the next stage. And it's exactly what you're saying, right? So we can allow these, if we're smart and we're willing to be embrace risk, there's some real interesting technologies that will give our partner countries this ability to leapfrog. I couldn't agree with you more.
It's very cool. Well, you mentioned kind of donor and development groups, and I imagine a lot of people tuning in here today are wondering, what role do I play? So, for organizations like that are either donor or development or both organizations, how can they help make all of this more accessible and really start to, accelerate the implementation of these new technologies?
Well, one area where donors and development organizations have a significant role to play is in leading the drive for responsible, inclusive, and the ethical use of technology. I'm sure most people did the math when I spoke just a short while ago about the projections on the 2025, 500 million people having access, and those that were already leaping ahead of me were saying to themselves, well, wait a second, what about the 30% of people who won't own a phone, or the 40% who won't have access to the internet? And that's true. The fact of the matter is that roughly 450 million people live in areas right now that do not have access to mobile broadband coverage, with the largest gap being in sub-Saharan Africa, where 19% of that continent's population still live in areas where mobile broadband isn't available. So how do we include those who are left out of the digital revolution? And that's got to be our role as development organizations, right? We have to focus on that population. So as next generation technologies such as artificial intelligence become more sophisticated and prevalent, we must also recognize the fact that most of the intellectual property ownership of these technologies is concentrated in a small number of companies and countries. So there's also a growing environmental cost of an increasingly digitized world, from pollution stemming from the mining of rare metals, that's needed for phones, computer chips, and massive increases in electricity demand, much of which is still sourced from non-renewable carbon-based resources. So if we want a future of digital agriculture to be more locally led, climate friendly, inclusive, and user-centric, the status quo will likely not lead us there. So practitioners and investors in international development have been leaders in the promotion of the responsible use of technology and data for, well, we've been doing this for some time, but there's often a disconnect between the principles we espouse and the realities and pressures of implementing projects on relatively short time frames. So we just have to commit ourselves to redoubling our efforts to comprehensively apply the principles for digital development across everything we do, not just when it's easy or convenient. We also have to incorporate principles of inclusive development, including do no harm and do nothing, and well, particularly on the inclusiveness in all of our work with digital, rather than all too often simply seeing things as a check the box activity. Mm-hmm. Now, we should also support local ecosystem actors, they're already leading the way with much of the digital agriculture innovation in our partner countries. And they're doing so in ways that lead to a viable and sustainable trajectory of growth. So of course, there isn't one size fit all model that works across the world, right? So we have to be ready to support mature and vibrant digital agriculture ecosystems, such as in Kenya or India. They're going to look quite different than our support for less developed markets. And so we need to make sure that we're flexible, adjustable, but keeping those principles in mind. So last, we should seek to identify gaps in the market where we can provide the most value. Certain demographic segments, particularly those that are the hardest to reach or in the poorest of the poor, are generally not profitable to service or traditional commercial companies. So I encourage all of us, at the moment I'm talking about our development organizations, to think how we can crowd in investment, how we can elevate issues of inclusion and ethics to the forefront of digital development, in the policy of the digital development, and then how we can incentivize an uptake of the business models that prioritize inclusion, local ownership, and individual sovereignty, so that the fourth agriculture revolution truly benefits everyone.
Yeah. Jim, you've done a great job of kind of talking about the technology, talking about the task ahead, and even some of the challenges, that lie ahead for all this. But I'm wondering, as we kind of close out this section of the Fireside Chat and move on to the next presentation, if maybe before we do, you can kind of cast a vision for us of with the opportunity here, what's at stake and what's possible if we can really, transition into this fourth agricultural revolution.
Yeah, great question. And I would say that the green revolution is actually the third revolution in agriculture. And as we've already seen in previous transitions from one agriculture revolution to the next, there's tremendous opportunity to resolve the challenges or shortcomings of the preceding era. So this transition from the third to the fourth agriculture revolution, it isn't any different from that perspective. So we all have to acknowledge that despite feeding billions in the green revolution, it brought its own challenges. There were trade-offs in terms of environmental stewardship, for example, and particularly in, say, water quality, vector-borne disease, misuse of crop protection practices. They led to soil and water degradation in some areas. And with any kind of change, not all farmers benefited. And indeed, the greatest benefits accrued to low-income consumers. So the fourth agriculture revolution is a synthesis of that green revolution, lessons learned, and the challenges cited by its critics, reducing the use of land, reducing the use of energy, and chemical inputs through precision agriculture, gene editing, environmentally friendly technologies, such as axial flow and solar irrigation, biological control, for instance. This back to where we started. The ongoing conflict in Ukraine has reinforced how interconnected global supply chains are. Egypt, it gets around 80% of its wheat from Russia and Ukraine. Russia is also a major producer of raw materials used in fertilizer, which is driving up the costs of fertilizers globally. So with these supply chains disrupted, the food security impacts of the Russian invasion are going to be felt well beyond the borders of Ukraine. So as we move into this fourth agricultural revolution, we have to think about the role of new technologies, including digital technologies, AI, blockchain, how they can play a role in making markets more nimble, adaptive, and reducing the negative impacts of commodity speculation that we're already seeing just 15 days into this invasion. So acknowledging the critiques of the Green Revolution and putting climate considerations and inclusion at the heart of our work will help place all of us as development partners in advancing more rapidly down the road in which we all want to go. Increasing yields to feed a growing number of hungry families while also helping to transform agri-food systems that will deliver affordable and healthy diets, and then at the same time helping to address climate. That's the goals that I think if we can, again, go back to those principles, if we can embrace those. We might have disagreements here and there about how we do it, and it will vary by country, but we're going to be moving in the right direction. And then once we hit the scaling that's available, that is on offer by this fourth revolution, I'm really confident that we're going to see a much better place just a few years down the line. So let me stop there.
That was fantastic, Jim. Thank you so much. It's great context, not only very informative for our session, but great context for the entire session as a whole, to keep those things in mind as we go forward. And I definitely, as we transition to this fourth agricultural revolution, we want to make sure that we don't forget lessons learned in the first, second, and third revolutions. And that's what we're going to bring on your colleague, Mike Michener, next, Deputy Assistant Administrator for USAID, to talk about. So, Jim, thank you very much. And Mike, we'll welcome you to the virtual stage here.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks very much, and thanks to you and Jim for getting us started here. So everyone, hello everyone. My name is Mike Michener, Deputy Assistant Administrator in the Bureau for Resilience and Food Security at USAID. That's where I work with Jim, and I'm going to walk us through a little bit of agricultural history today, our path to Agriculture 4.0. So if I could ask Ravi to put up the slides. There we go. Okay. So next slide, please. Okay, so the fourth agricultural revolution holds great promise for the world's farmers and consumers, particularly if we are paying close attention to ensuring that its benefits are accessible, distributed equitably, and responsive to the needs of all humankind. But before we peer into the future of Agriculture 4.0 with our other panelists here today, let's re-examine our past to get a better idea of how we got here so we can maximize the potential benefits going forward. Here are 4 questions that might help illuminate our path. How can we be sure that the fourth agricultural revolution is underway? What gave rise to previous agricultural revolutions and what brought them to a close? What do agricultural revolutions have in common? And how should we define an agricultural revolution? Next slide. Let's review what we know about each agricultural revolution. The Neolithic Revolution was the wide-scale transition of many human cultures beginning 11,000 years ago from hunting and gathering to settlement and agriculture. The British Agricultural Revolution was a historic increase in agricultural production between the 17th and 19th centuries as a result of social, economic, and technological changes. The Green Revolution is a set of scientific innovations and practices occurring from the early 1900s, including high-yield varieties, chemical inputs, and increased mechanization. And finally, Agriculture 4.0 refers to recent changes in new technologies, particularly the use of AI, knowledge, and digital tools to make smarter production decisions, grow more nutritious crops, and power autonomous robots. Next slide. Taking what we know about the common features of the previous three agricultural revolutions, we can propose a definition to help us understand our transition to Agriculture 4.0. What do agricultural revolutions have in common? All began with the introduction of new innovative practices, technologies, or shifts in the production of food. These changes resulted in exponential increases in productivity with less human labor, freeing some from agricultural work. The new methods eventually came under stress or were challenged in some way. The changes resolved the challenges of the previous revolution. So I would incorporate these common features into this definition of agricultural revolutions. Next slide. To demonstrate this definition in action, it would be helpful to understand how knowledge of agriculture has evolved over time. As in any field, theories emerge and are challenged and eventually synthesized into new approaches. The process of resolving the conflict of ideas is often referred to as the dialectical method. Georg Hegel, a German philosopher, simplified the Socratic method to three dialectical stages of development: a thesis, giving rise to its reaction; an antithesis, which contradicts or negates the thesis; a synthesis, which resolves the tension between the two; and the synthesis itself becomes the next thesis, and the process repeats. Knowledge of agriculture evolves in this manner. The introduction of new innovative practices and technologies is eventually challenged or contradicted in some form. The resolution of that contradiction provides the basis for the next agricultural revolution. Let's examine this evolution of knowledge through each agricultural revolution. Next slide. In several regions throughout the world, nomadic hunter-gatherers began to adopt and refine agricultural practices. The dawn of agriculture introduced a variety of innovations and practices: domestication of plants through selective breeding of cereal grasses and pioneer crops; domestication of animals, as keeping animals close to settlements became more efficient; the use of secondary products such as hides, skins, wool, milk, animals for labor, transportation, and manure for soil conditioning. These practices persisted for thousands of years and were improved by early civilizations through innovations such as irrigation, storage, and trade. Roman villas laid the groundwork for a feudal manor system based on serfdom that continued throughout the Middle Ages. Next slide. The feudal manor system was challenged first by events, then by ideas. The Great Plague reduced the nobility's hold over the lower classes. Depopulation caused labor shortages, and landowners were pushed to substitute monetary rents for labor services in order to keep tenants. Along with the breakdown in serfdom, feudal land tenure was also increasingly challenged through the development of English common law, laying the foundation for a land-owning system throughout Britain. New methods of scientific inquiry produced rapid technological change, while the Age of Enlightenment further challenged the conditions of feudal bondage and the institution of slavery. The manor system of open field cultivation also caused cattle overgrazing, uncontrolled breeding, and the spread of animal diseases. As large tracts of land were enclosed and converted for agricultural purposes, productivity increased. The formation of agricultural societies and annual shows also facilitated innovation and the spread of ideas about farming. Next slide. This led the breakdown of the manor system, combined with increases in labor and land productivity, prompted an unprecedented increase in agricultural production in Britain between the 17th and 19th centuries. Major developments and innovations include the Norwalk four-course crop rotation using fodder crops in place of leaving the land fallow. The Dutch improved Chinese plow required less animal power. Enclosure removed common rights and established exclusive ownership of land. Development of transportation infrastructure promoted national markets for agricultural goods. New crops from the Columbian Exchange and selective breeding of livestock spurred further growth. Sound advice on farming began to appear in England in the mid-17th century from a variety of writers, and the overall productivity of Britain started to grow significantly. Agriculture 2.0 proved to be a major turning point in history, allowing the population to more than double between 1700 and 1870, sustaining Britain's rise to industrial preeminence. Next slide. The success of Agriculture 2.0 was contradicted by the idea that too much agricultural productivity was causing unsustainable population growth that threatened the world with mass starvation. Thomas Malthus, an English economist and demographer, observed in 1798 that population growth will always tend to outrun food supply, and that human betterment required strict limits on reproduction. As a solution, Malthus urged moral restraint. People must practice abstinence before marriage, force sterilization where necessary, and institute punishment for so-called unprepared parents who had more children than they could support. The synthesis of Agriculture 2.0 and its Malthusian critics came from Danish economist Esther Boserup in 1965. Her theory of agricultural intensification posits that population change drives the intensity of agricultural production. Boserup argued that in times of pressure, people will always find ways to increase the production of food by increasing workforce, machinery, fertilizers, and so on. That in fact, necessity is the mother of invention. Next slide. Recognizing that innovation could solve the Malthusian trap, agricultural researchers like Norman Borlaug pioneered new technologies that markedly increased agricultural productivity. In 1968, USAID Administrator William S. Scott recognized these incredible gains and coined the term Green Revolution in describing how our agency would approach agricultural development. Major developments and innovations include newer methods of cultivation, including increased mechanization, chemical fertilizers and agrochemical inputs, high-yielding varieties of seeds and biotechnology, modern scientific methods, and technology transfer to the developing world. Studies show that the Green Revolution contributed to widespread reduction of poverty, averted hunger for millions, raised incomes, reduced greenhouse gas emissions, reduced land use for agriculture, and contributed to declines in infant mortality. But more intensive practices came at the cost of environmental and social impacts. Next slide. As the Green Revolution saved billions of lives, the environmental and social byproducts of Agriculture 3.0 was often regarded as the necessary price of progress. This notion was increasingly challenged over the past 50 years. The organic movement began in the early 1900s in response to the shift towards synthetic nitrogen fertilizers and pesticides in the early days of industrial agriculture. Rachel Carson, an American biologist and conservationist, raised concerns about synthetic pesticides in her 1962 book, Silent Spring, which spurred a reversal in US pesticide policy and inspired a global environmental movement. Concerns were raised about debatable health and environmental effects of GMOs. Overcultivation and deforestation are driving forces behind reductions in biodiversity and have impacts on water flows and the cycling of carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus. While the synthesis of Agriculture 3.0 and its critics is ongoing, we are seeing some promising solutions embedded in the most recent developments in agricultural research. Next slide. Agriculture 4.0 is about using knowledge and technology to increase productivity while responding to the dual challenges of climate change and increased pressures on ecosystems and natural resources. This is the exciting promise of the fourth agricultural revolution. We will see not only great increases in productivity as in past agricultural revolutions, but also substantial reductions in the Green Revolution's negative environmental externalities of some high input agriculture. Here are just a few examples of how new technologies will sustainably increase agricultural productivity. Blockchain technology and big data will maintain the integrity of agricultural supply chains while protecting data privacy. AI, drones, and precision agriculture will sharply reduce the use of chemical inputs. Gene editing through CRISPR technology responds to concerns about transgenic GMOs. Blue foods and meat analogs will reduce the climate impact of overfishing and livestock production. Vertical and urban farming will reduce land use and encourage reforestation. The challenge for USAID and everyone involved in agricultural development is to ensure that the benefits of the fourth agricultural revolution are not limited by access to resources. These incredible technologies must be researched, scaled for use by smallholders, and accessible to all, including women and youth, just as USAID worked to do in the Green Revolution that we helped launch 60 years ago. Now we will turn to other panelists to hear about some exciting developments in Agriculture 4.0. It is my great pleasure to introduce the president of the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, Dr. Agnes Calabata, to tell us more about the transition to Agriculture 4.0 in Africa. Dr. Calabata, over to you.
Thank you so much, Mike, for the introduction, and thank you for having me in this conversation. When I listen to the conversation of the Green Revolution, it almost feels like second nature, because I feel like the Green Revolution in a way, and trying to achieve self-sufficiency in food, trying to achieve better yields, trying to ensure that we can use food and what the agricultural sector can do to deal with the challenge of poverty is something that I live with every day. But the institution, let me go back to the Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa, AGRA, and the promise and really what the institution meant and what it is looking to achieve. Kofi Annan, back in 2006, 5 years after the African heads of state signed the CAADP compact, was really puzzled at how he could support them to advance the whole idea of a green revolution or even food self-sufficiency. They had said they wanted to move forward on food self-sufficiency, on reducing poverty, but he felt like they didn't have the basic elements of what it required to move these things forward, and as you've just said. So he thought that Africa had everything it needed. It had 70% of the population was in agriculture, so why not build on that? It had 70% of its land that is arable, and it had there were available technologies everywhere that were changing people's lives. So he said, okay, these are huge opportunities we should build on, but we have huge gaps. One of the biggest gaps was research and extension. And as you would remember, Mike, the US, to be able to advance the Green Revolution, had to put in place a whole land grant university system. There was no capacity on this continent. So then he looked at how do you move lessons? Africa has 55 countries all trying to do certain things. How do you move lessons around? So he thought that there had to be a mechanism also that allows us to move lessons around. And then he also wanted to avoid the mistakes that countries had made in their journeys to the Green Revolution. So that's how AGRA was created. AGRA was created to really ensure that we can build technical expertise that can help African countries adopt systems and technologies that can advance the Green Revolution, but also AGRF then was created as a forum that helps move lessons around from one country to another country, where opportunities showed themselves to be working. Fast forward, AGRA now has worked very hard with the support and of partners like USAID, who has been at the center of it, like BMGF, Rockefeller Foundation, and others. We have skills that are actually busy churning out varieties across the continent in national university, in national universities, but also in research institutions that are producing resilient materials all the way from millet to beans, to cowpeas, to soybean, to potatoes, to cassava. And of course, most people just think that AGRA works on maize, but actually we work across 18 varieties that are staple crops to African diets and African food that Africans want to see and eat every day. So those varieties being available doesn't mean that they will reach the farmer. So we went ahead also and worked on building the system, for the private sector system that takes them. You know, when I went to Rwanda and started working in Rwanda as a minister, one of the things that surprised me is just how private sector doesn't just happen. Private sector is created. And there are cases in Africa where you go and you have to start from zero to actually get a private sector working. Now I'm very proud to say that we have over 110 companies that are retailing and working and taking seeds to farmers. We have distribution networks that are reaching 15 million farmers. That is only from the first part. Fast forward, and this has been a revolution in itself. Fast forward and working with you all, AGRA now has been looking at how do we ensure that governments actually embrace this more. We reach many more people, we become more inclusive. We reach geographies that in which farmers are, but they've never been reached by these technologies anyway, very isolated in these places. And then we also focus on the market failures that Jim was talking about. How do we ensure that these market failures that continue to make it impossible for private sector, and I'm talking here SMEs, local SMEs, to build businesses in the agricultural sector that can move the sector forward? How do we continue working on those? And that work is what we've been doing for the last few years. And I'm proud to say that across 11 countries, in fact, 9 of the 11 countries we are working on, I was listening to the biannual review report today, which is a report the African continent puts out. 9 of the 11 countries we are working on are making progress towards the agriculture sector in terms of building systems that can deliver for farmers, in terms of ensuring that farmers are actually accessing the improved seeds they need, the fertilizers they need, using the right level of fertilization like Kofi Annan was hoping for so that they can advance. Yes, we are still behind in so many ways, and yes, we're not reaching so many farmers as we should, but the journey is definitely on. Fast forward and coming out of the Food Systems Summit, there are going to be a number of other things we need to look at. And like I said, this has been an evolution itself. The biggest evolution, which takes me to the fourth agricultural revolution you're talking about, the biggest revolution has to be the food systems revolution, recognizing that we are going to have to manage how we use the environment. Here in Africa, 30% of the food we eat still comes from more environment, which means cutting forests, which means using virgin land to produce food. We need to create a balance between what the Green Revolution brought forward in terms of improved varieties of seed that give farmers more, better use of fertilizers and very intentional use of fertilizers so that we do not contaminate environment, but then stopping the whole extensification as a mechanism of producing food. So sustainable intensification is one of the things that we talked about within the Food Systems Summit that we need to start thinking about. As Africa, I don't know that we have another choice besides finding ways of ensuring that productivity continues to increase, while we are using less land. The next opportunity, but also of course, taking me to the point you were talking about around the Industrial Revolution, is all the technologies that are in our hands now that are coming forward, that we have the opportunity to exploit, whether it is how we will use remote sensing and satellite imagery to start ensuring that African farmers too can participate in rehabilitating, regenerating their own environments, and actually earning carbon credits from that and start a new stream of making money. And this is something that is already beginning. These are things that are already beginning to happen in India and that we are looking to then gain from. Climate change is here, and climate change is something that we are going to have to live with for some time. And we have to find ways of dealing with. But in the meantime, we have to build insurance products that reach every farmer in every village. And the only way you can do that is to use some of these technologies that are coming up through the fourth industrial revolution. So there are a number of things that are happening, but the most exciting bit of it is it's going to be easier to connect farmers to markets. It's going to be easier to connect farmers to research. It's going to be easier to get information faster and understand how quickly we can service farmers faster and how quickly we can change direction based on what we are learning. So it's exciting times, and I'm glad to be part of this conversation.
Thank you, Agnes, very much. I wanted to ask a follow-up question, if I could. You mentioned kind of how difficult it is to sort of create a private sector from scratch, and your ability to do that in so many places. With this next agricultural revolution being about digital technologies, does that mean a whole new private sector from scratch, or is there ability to kind of leverage the progress that's been made for that?
No, that's a huge important question. To be honest, I was thinking about it earlier and how that just gives us such a great opportunity to start thinking about how we leverage Africa's youth. Africa has 77% of the population of Africa is young people that are looking for things to do, young people that will tell you they have no land, but there are land markets that we can build based on just having data and based on being able to use that information to really design products that can actually allow youth to use these pieces of land and be able to make them productive, but also to design products, to deliver services in the sector, to correct information and use that information right. One of the biggest things that has held Africa back for the longest time is the assumption, which I met several times in my work, the assumption that technology will take away work from Africans. That's not true. That's not true. We delayed to mechanize because people would say, oh, if you mechanize, how will people survive? They survive by digging, using the hoe. if you mechanize, you take away their work. No, can't work be created away from the land? Can't work be created around better food, around industrialization like the rest of the world did? This is the opportunity for Africa to build on the data industry that is being created and the services that we can actually take back to the population. Take advantage of Africa's young people that have the ability to use this information, and also take the ability of the young people that have the ability to absorb technologies from elsewhere and use it in the agriculture sector and help advance the value of the sector, whether it is in e-commerce, whether it is in crop monitoring and ensuring that you're providing services around locusts, as we just saw in Kenya, and making sure that farmers know when these locusts are coming and actually you can provide a service to deal with it. Whether it's in post-harvest management, ensuring that you're selling products to farmers around monitoring, around ensuring that you can prevent damage, around all sorts of things. So there's a whole industry that can be created. And the opportunity is we have a population that is ready to absorb this type of technologies and actually use them to provide services for the wider community, but also to ensure that they can engage better than they have been engaging.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. I hope you and Mike will both stick around here for some more dialogue. I want to get to a couple of our other speakers and then come back to some Q&A. So if you're out there tuning in and you have a question, feel free to go ahead and put that submit that for us, and we'll consider it here as we get through more of our discussion. But Agnes, thank you so much. That was fantastic. Let's go over to Matthias Berninger, Senior Vice President for Public Affairs and Sustainability at Bayer. Matthias, so we have you on the line here. I'd love to hear about some of the technological advancements that are out there, specifically what you're working on there at Bayer, and things that might benefit exactly the types of people that we're talking about here so far.
Yeah, so Tim, thank you for having me, and good evening from Germany today. I just want to start where we began this conversation. I have been operating practically throughout my professional career, both in government as well as in business, in and around food systems. I've been participating in numerous scenario games, even war games about like food crises. We all lived to the 2008 to 2012 turmoil in the global commodity markets and the food crises that then led to all kinds of challenges around the world. And never have I been more concerned than tonight about what's going on in global food markets. We are facing a perfect storm of pandemic-related challenges, of climate-related challenges, and Putin-related challenges. The invasion of Putin in the Ukraine is not only about guns and gas, it's also about grains. And one of the very important things is that we understand that the fourth revolution in agriculture is not one that we can choose to do. We have to go down that path because the stresses on our food systems are very dramatic, and we can go into more details later. But let me start by saying that when I look at the global UN Food Systems Conference, and Agnes talked about a couple of the outcomes, what I like the most is that we didn't talk so much about individual features, but we looked more at systems. And we also looked more at the benefits that a food system thinking brings. And that's exactly how we need to operate. It's not just about cool technology, and I will talk about cool technology. It's mostly about people. It's about people who in the subsistence phase are some of the most entrepreneurial people I know, because their ingenuity secures their survival. But it's also about people who grow up in the hundreds of thousands, young people in Africa and Asia, who are super entrepreneurial and who are driving this change in the rural areas. Wherever I visit, I can see them, and I can also see their excitements. And I think we should follow some of their ideas much more than trying to figure everything out for them and impose solutions. We at Bayer had said we want to reach 100 million of the roughly 550 million smallholder farmers in the world by 2030. And this year, in 2022, we are on track to reach more than 50 million of them, with all kinds of inputs, but also with new solutions that integrate what makes agriculture such an exciting field. So let me start with one example. ApolloAg, which is a startup in Nairobi that uses satellite data, uses service providers that on motorcycles drive around in the countryside, GPS locate farmers' plots, and then helps those farmers by prescribing certain tactics, by providing the necessary financing for inputs, and also by helping them to adjust to changing weather phenomena or global market developments throughout the year. We have reached more than 100,000 smallholder farmers in East Africa with ApolloAg. And what's most exciting is the yield increase. What's also exciting is that the money we provide by way of lending is being paid back on the back of the success of those farmers. So it's a farmer financing that basically doesn't leave much to chance, because we have so much information through satellites already today that once we connect them to individual plots, and once we leverage the leapfrog and digital technology that you can see in Asia and Africa, we are really moving to a great place. So ApolloAg, one example, where you use satellite data, digital farming methodology to basically increase yield. The other example are entrepreneurs who use drones. Mike has shown us a picture with a drone, who use drones to apply crop protection in very different ways. I think one of the big challenges in the crop protection space is that it's like a highway where a Ford Model T and the latest Tesla are driving at the same time. The global pesticide market needs to make a choice. And I think the choice needs to be, let's invest in the most modern pesticides, and let's do it in a way that we target the application better. If and when we do that, we will be able to reach the goal postulated at the Convention on Biodiversity to halve the use of fertilizer in the world without compromising yield and with significant improvement of the health of rural communities. So this is possible. Again, technology plays a key role. A third example is Rnai Technology. This week was super exciting for Bayer, and ag nerds amongst us will realize why, because we had got approval for the first RNAi corn in the United States. Basically, we use the technology of gene silencing to make corn more resistant. We have done the same many years ago already in papaya, but the most exciting news was of June of last year, where Kenya approved a cassava based on this technology. So I can see progress in approvals of biotechnology. If a country like Kenya approves it with cassava, which is a base staple food for 800 million people roughly in the world, you can see that they bet on it. And when you look then at Nigeria, the largest producer of maize or corn in Africa, given the pressures of fall armyworm, they have introduced the first BT corn in Kenya, again, and a step in the right direction to fully leverage that technology. There's a lot of talk about gene editing. I think one of the biggest contributions we can make is support researchers in Africa to leverage gene editing technology. There are hundreds of brilliant researchers, men and women, and I met a couple of them. What they need is, they need access to the technology. They will figure it out themselves. They will improve crop and seed quality if we provide them access to those tools. And again, I think the debate whether biotechnology will, 25 years after the first commercial introduction of genetically modified seeds, will prevail or not. I think it will prevail. It has to prevail. Another example, and Tim, there is like a long list of them, because we spend roughly 2 billion euros every year in research and development in agriculture. That's more than our next 3 competitors combined. And only China as a country has a higher investment in agricultural research. So one of the next things we work on, which I find really important, is to make plants more resilient against climate change. Short corn is growing already in Africa. will be something that around the world reduces the lodging, the fact that the corn kind of gets knocked over by extreme weather events like storms, and as a result, the harvest is being lost. Short corn has another additional benefit, especially in Africa. In conflict zones, some of the high corn fields are often being seen not necessarily as a place to hide, but as a place where aggressors camouflage themselves in. So short corn will stop that, because it's actually short enough for me to kind of just look eye to the corn levels. It also will require less inputs by way of fertilizers. So this is a product where we believe we can really make a contribution to make plants more resilient against the extreme weather events that will follow. Speaking of extreme weather events, only 1/3 of all countries in the world has predictable or has like measures in place to predict drought. And of course, many of the countries we talk about don't have that. So drought is being one of the big challenges. The IPCC report, which was published just the other week, points to the fact that we have to live with much more likely extreme weather events, including droughts in the future. Let's make sure that we use our technologies, for example, the GRACE mission of NASA, to provide full access to drought forecasting capabilities for smallholders. There's a lot of conversation about emissions, methane emissions. And if you think about water shortages on the one side, and on the other side, high methane emissions, immediately you look at rice. I believe it's possible to transform rice planting from like paddy rice, wet, to dry rice, with the added benefit of more resilience against water shortages. However, you need chemistry, because water in rice also plays the role of a herbicide. So this is going to be another innovation we need. And I see Darren already on the screen, and he has written a fantastic book about the problem that if economies don't welcome innovation, we run into really a difficult environment. And that's why I believe we need to be as welcoming to the innovation in agriculture as we have been in medicine, when you look at what happened at the intersection of chemistry, biology, and artificial intelligence. That's where mRNA vaccines happened. And the same technology platforms will drive innovation in agriculture. Tim started the day talking about his concerns related to the fertilizer market. Fertilizer stand for roughly 4% of all carbon emissions. Fertilizers also are very much linked to water pollution. They are by far the most important cost ticket for farmers around the world, no matter whether they're large or small farmers. Fertilizers have been around for 100 years. I believe we can now replace a lot of the chemical-based nitrogen fertilizers with biological solutions, with seeds in rice, in corn, in wheat, that are more willing to create symbiotic relationships with microbes that kind of mineralize atmospheric nitrogen, but also with new microbes that are more amenable to kind of settle near the roots of these crops. So I believe it's possible that we can take out 20 to 30% of all fertilizers, leveraging gene editing, leveraging what we know about biology. And that's a very important element of the fourth revolution. The green revolution depends on the access to fertilizers, apart from better seeds. The fourth revolution depends on replacing chemistry with biology wherever we can. But that doesn't mean organic farming. That means full-on innovation focus at the intersection of chemistry, biology, and artificial intelligence. And with that, since I'm a real nerd, I love Darren's book. I hope that we hear some interesting additional input from Darren, and thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you very much. That was tremendous. And we have some follow-up questions for you that we will ask in the Q&A section. But because you provided such an excellent transition over to Darren, let's go over to Darren here. Darren Acemoglu, is an economist with MIT and an author, as you just heard Matthias mention. So Darren, I would love for you to maybe share with us a little bit about this concept of welcoming innovation and the benefits that can come from that. And I think that will blend itself nicely into the conversation we're going to have for the balance of our time here today.
Well, thanks, Tim, and I'm not going to take too much time so that we leave enough for the discussion. But my comments follow naturally from Matthias's and Mike's. In fact, Mike provided a wonderful framework for thinking about these issues, which he had kindly shared with me before. So my thoughts are triggered by those. And Mike emphasized two things. One is the promise of all the technologies of agriculture 4.0 and why they are so necessary today, but also the thesis, antithesis, synthesis. And here, I think the antithesis that we need is about how to control technology. I am not an expert on agricultural technologies, but a lot of my life has been spent on thinking about industrial technologies, automation, inequality, and the institutional framework in which these are embedded. And my general take is that, technology can do good or bad. It really depends on how you control it and what direction you develop it. This is very clear, I think, with recent digital technologies, with robotics, with automation technologies, and some of the fallout from unbalanced development of technologies and the wrong institutional framework for using them is, I think, seen by how much inequality has been created in the US labor market, for instance, where the real earnings of workers with a high school degree or less than a high school have fallen by more than 20% in real terms over the last 40 years. So the question is, what are the challenges that we need to confront in agriculture? And are we sure we're going to be able to do that with the technology? So let me actually play the role that I find quite natural for me to play, which is a counterbalance to the techno-optimism. So I have no disagreement that there are two tremendous challenges facing agriculture, both in the developed and the developing nations. One is to increase yields. World population is growing. Hunger is still a major problem. And the workforce in many developing countries is still agricultural. In the US, we need higher yields as well in many crops. And second is climate change. Agriculture is behind many other sectors in terms of adapting to agriculture, to climate change, and to reducing its contribution to GHG emissions. And so when you put these two together, it's natural to think that we have to have a technological solution to it. I agree with that. It's also natural to think, essentially, I think for the subtext of Mike's presentation, that we have a tremendous crop of new technologies coming up, which provide the tools for us to engineer such a technological transformation. I won't repeat them, but I think certainly better data collection with AIs, but also robotics, drones, precision agriculture, absolutely very important. But what has already been perfected, the development of new chemicals and seeds, now augmented with gene editing and other technologies in order to deal with pathogens and droughts. I think those are tremendous tools. But I see three challenges, and I don't think the market by itself is going to resolve them. And I don't think right now the US government is doing nearly enough in confronting them. One, there are many different ways in which we can develop these new seeds, varieties, and other precision technologies. Some of them are going to have much better implications for climate change and emissions. There is no way the market's going to get this balance right. And US is no different from most of the other countries in the world, that we are absolutely not doing what needs to be done in order to clean up agriculture. I think agriculture is going to be increasingly the most problematic sector in terms of its contribution to climate change. And that requires a specific path of technologies, and we're not doing enough for that. Second, market structure in agriculture matters greatly. GMO, for example, can be a force for good, or it can be a force for bad, and it often is a force for bad if it already, if it exacerbates already existing problems in agriculture. For example, smallholders that become beholden to seed producers, because with modified seeds, their dependence is going to increase, and market structure is going to change, probably in favor of big commercial agriculture. There's, in theory, nothing wrong with market consolidation, but it comes with huge distributional effects, and I think more small producers have been a leading sector in some countries in terms of innovation and adaptation, and I think we have to worry about that as well. But the third one is actually does not receive enough attention, perhaps, in some of these discussions, and I want to emphasize it as well as my final comment, and then I'll say one or two sentences about institutional structure about it. But drawing on my work on industrial technologies, you also have to worry about jobs. Agriculture is not a huge sector in the US economy, but it still employs, together with fisheries, over 3.5 million people when I last checked. Some of these are quite low skill and have few other options. The question is, as more and more producers are going to go towards greater automated technologies, robotics are going to advance a lot in agriculture, for example, in the next decade. What this will do to job creation. My research has emphasized that often there are different choices to reorganize work and create new tasks for workers, for existing workers in different sectors. And that is sometimes quite good for productivity because humans have unique skills. So certainly when you reorganize, for example, strawberry or raspberry picking so that robots can do the job, that's certainly going to reduce costs. But there will be losses in terms of flexibility, more niche production, adaptation to changing conditions when the humans are out of the loop. And I think there are different ways of organizing production that actually makes better use of human talents. And all of this brings me to the institutional context. I think big tech companies have a lot to contribute to this. That could be chemical companies that are in biotech companies on the GMO side, technological companies on the side of providing new software, new data infrastructure, data collection, robotics companies that are going to start pushing for big advances in precision equipment and robots. But all of this comes from the side of big companies that have a specific vision for how new technologies are going to be rolled out. And I think a stronger institutional context to worry about some of the issues that I have highlighted may be necessary. What are we doing to jobs? What are we doing to climate? What are we doing to the market structure in agriculture? I'll just leave it at there, and I look forward to comments and questions.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate those comments, and actually we're going to open this back up to each of the speakers that you all have heard from so far. And I think, as I'm trying to synthesize a lot of the points that have been made, because we're trying to get our arms around really big problems here, one thing that has come up repeatedly has been it's not just a lack of technology problem. It's also the implementation, it's the people, it's the institutions. So I want to maybe open up a dialogue about that real quick, about what are the next steps. I don't think the next steps are probably technological. I think we're all saying that the technology is emerging or has emerged. But what are the next steps to actually seeing this make a positive difference? And Darren, while I've got you up on screen, I don't know if you want to start, but I'd also open up that to Mike and Agnes and Matthias as well.
I'm happy to let Matthias, Agnes, and Mike respond on this because I think I've already covered some of the topics on this, and I want to hear their reactions, and then I would be happy to come back after that.
Okay, Agnes, if you're there, I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
No, thank you. I'm here, and I'm happy to jump in. One of the things that keeps coming to my mind around what we could be doing differently around here to get things to move faster, to deliver game changers around, use this opportunity to deliver game changers, are probably institutional, right? Ensuring that we actually have the ability to have institutions in place that can, many people have talked about whether this would be good for people in terms of inclusivity, whether it would create imbalances and no imbalances. And again, having institutions that do understand the place of inclusivity and ensuring that actually there's work that is being done to ensure that we do not create more problems by using technologies is important. Policies to ensure that data can be used for good as well as can be used for bad and wrong. And we have a responsibility to ensure that actually for most people that don't know what's happening behind these screens, behind that we get, they actually get to be protected. I know cases where businesses are being pushed to farmers, information is being pushed to farmers, and things are being dangled. If you do this, you get this. But actually, they're just transmitting information, and that information is being used to determine how many times do they purchase this, how many times do they go to the market, how many times do they do, and that creates all sorts of incentives for businesses that are trying to develop around these areas to actually create other businesses that farmers don't need or those communities don't need. So I think at the end of the day, for me, it's how institutions will be able to protect people, how institutions will be able to advance the use of technologies for good of people, but also how institutions will be able to continue innovating and staying ahead of innovation, because we are living amidst lots of challenges and we just have to stay one step ahead. And there's an opportunity for that to be done, at least for my part of the world, where the majority of the people that I work with don't have the ability to do that on their own.
Thank you, Agnes. And Matthias, I want to give you a chance to weigh in as well, but we also have a question from the audience that kind of goes parallel with this bigger topic, which is, the question is from Rob. It says, what are the big agri-corporates and large ecosystem players doing to support startups that are essentially the catalysts for making Agriculture 4.0 ubiquitous?
Well, I think most companies, and Bayer included, we invest a lot in startups. So in the Bayer case, it's roughly $500 million, but with an asterisk. That's both in the startup scene in ag as well as in health, because we are operating in both spaces, which is a bit unique for us as a company. But for example, the replacement of traditional Haber-Bosch-based fertilizers with new technology is a result of this partnership with startups. Yeah? It's a result of investing in these kind of ideas. If you think about a partnership we have with a company called Oxitec that works on basically family planning for insects. Again, a super innovative company. They're trying to kind of go after mosquitoes, but also after the fall armyworm moth, which is one of those insects we really have to take care of if we want to feed the world. And what we learned as a large company is that collaboration works. Apollo Egg, the other example I had was there, was also part of this. So absolutely, you have to be full on doing that. To Darren's point, I think we need to have clarity, unlike the environment in which we operate. So for example, the decision of a large number of countries at the first day of COP26 to end deforestation by 2030 is one of those framework decisions that, if it's really agreed and executed against by countries like Brazil, in Central Africa, but also in Indonesia and other parts of Southeast Asia, sets a very clear framework condition for agriculture. And I think we need them. The conventional biodiversity says we want to halve the amount of fertilizers we want to use. We want to halve the amount of pesticides we want to use, but we also want to reduce the amount of land on which food is produced. These are very clear framework expectations, but we will only be able to feed 8.5, or 9 billion people if they come with another point, and that is, in order to get there, we need to welcome innovation. And that's the part of the conversation that always gets lost, yeah? As one example.
Sorry, I was on mute there. Mike, let's bring you back in as well. You got the chance to provide some really good context for this entire conversation about the lessons from the first, second, and third agricultural revolutions. You know, as you think about ag sector stakeholders trying to facilitate this locally led innovation, you know, what in your mind is sort of the best way forward from here?
So I think we need to unshackle local researchers and connect them to, so USAID, we fund 20 odd innovation labs, US universities. Every one of them are connected to a university in the developing world in one of our Feed the Future countries. And so we try to link them and connect them. And then we're working on scaling those innovations so that they're actually accessible by smallholders, by startups. So a lot of what we're trying to do is make the connections. And I think another big thing is remove things like intellectual property as a barrier. Encourage programs like WIPO has a great program called Research, Search, where they encourage the sharing of intellectual property holders to share their intellectual property with researchers in the developing world for developmental purposes. So I think we have to kind of remove those IP barriers, encourage connectivity, and invest more, frankly, in locally led research. To make sure those innovations, as I think Matthias said in his remarks, the local researchers know the problems they've got to solve. They've got the tools. We just have to help them make the connections, get them connected to the intellectual property they need, and give them the tools to help solve the problems. Thank
you, Mike. And Darren, we've got a question from the audience about adopting technologies without sufficient validation. Now, the exact questions from Martin, it says, is it safe to adopt 4.0 technologies without sufficient testimonials and foolproof concepts? Sort of the risk being put on the farmer. Can you maybe speak a little bit about sort of like how that de-risking innovation happens?
Well, that's a very important question. I think, you know, especially if we're thinking of small farmers, especially outside of the US as well, I think it's unrealistic to think that they are going to be in a position to do all the full cost-benefit analysis, including unintended consequences. So again, I think the responsibility is going to be on the regulatory framework and on the companies developing the technology, which sort of amplifies the point that I made. But I want to give one, you know, I left this out from my talk because I didn't want to take too much more time, but I think it amplifies the point that Agnes made. Let me give you one example of the types of worries that I have. You know, as Agnes pointed out, Mike pointed out, Matthias pointed out, you know, we want productivity improvements in agriculture to be broad-based throughout the globe. That means especially in the most disadvantaged parts of the world, in sub-Saharan Africa, for example. But if you look at the current business as usual research, including those that get USAID funding, it does very little for sub-Saharan Africa. Let me give you an example from my from research by two of my PhD students, Jacob Moscana and Karthik Shastri, who looked at new GM crops and that try to sort of deal with pathogens and diseases. So if you take, for example, corn, it turns out that the type of maize borer that ravages corn fields is somewhat different and generates different cryotoxins in the US versus in sub-Saharan Africa. The one in the US is called, which affects both US and Europe, is called European maize borer. there are over 5,000 biotech patents, including several GM varieties, against the European maize borer. Its close cousin, maize stalker borer, affects sub-Saharan Africa and has no impact in US or Europe. It's even more destructive in sub-Saharan context. And the resistant crops developed in the US are completely useless because that generates different cryotoxins. There have been only 5 biotech patents against the maize stalk borer and no GM activity. So there is no way in which this market process is going to generate, when left in the hands of big biotech companies, a inclusive opportunity for using this new knowledge that Mike influenced for the whole world. And again, this is another place where the regulatory framework, institutional framework, and a more inclusive approach is necessary. I think, big tech companies are going to talk endlessly about how they're going to revolutionize everything. Big biotech companies are going to talk about how they are bringing amazing gifts to the rest of the world, but reality is quite different.
Okay, thank you for that. I know we're running.
I beg to disagree, Darren.
I was going to send it to you next. Go ahead.
Yeah, I beg to disagree. So when you look at, for example, the fall armyworm, which is another of these insects, which is mostly one that you find in the south, the technology transfer of BT technology that kind of repels the fall armyworm from Brazil and Argentina in the direction of Africa is easily made. We are ready to do that. The problem is that BT technology is not approved in Africa, with the one example exemption in the food crop I just mentioned in Nigeria. We have this technology approved and welcomed in cotton, and you can immediately see that. I also work closely with our researchers who work on exactly those insects. In the moment we get a clear signal that these technologies are welcome, we will provide the necessary products. It's not that complicated. For me, it's like almost hard to understand, but for our teams, in terms of the technology, it's not that complicated. So this is a bit like, we get beaten up for trying to get these kind of technologies into Africa. And then when we are being blocked, we get beaten up for not having done enough on that. We have to make a choice here. Yeah? If we get a clear signal from countries in Africa that they welcome this technology, I promise we will research the hell out of it to make sure that these technologies are available for smallholder farmers as soon as possible. The short corn example I talked about in the past, what would have happened is short corn would have been developed in North America, marketed in North America, and then some 5 or 10 years later, we would start to adapt it to other regions. Here, we have gone exactly the opposite way. We have from the start established this technology in Africa, in Southeast Asia, and in the United States in order to be able to roll it out fast. So there has been a sea change in the way we go about that. And then there's another lighthouse program, which is the African Orphan Crop Program, something the company I worked for before, Mars, has been very involved in developing, looking at orphan crops, not looking at the cash crops, but looking at the large variety of local crops that are the backbone of subsistence agriculture. And again, a lot can be done here as soon as the signal is that these technologies are welcomed, like the cassava example I shared, we will be all in.
Okay, well, I think this is just clear evidence that we need a much longer ongoing dialogue about these issues. I really appreciate both of you being very eloquent in your thoughts, in your approach. And boy, there's a lot more to unpack here. I'm sorry that we're at the top of the hour, but I do want to give time to Dr. Eike Heffler, project leader of the agriculture sector at GIZ Germany, to provide some closing comments before we close out today's session and ultimately our conference. But thank you so much to the panelists on our discussion here today. But Eike, it's over to you.
Thank you so much, Tim, for this. And let me thank you for giving me the opportunity to say some closing remarks. I want to especially thank USA, DIA, IntelliCap, and my ICTforAg colleagues, and the entire advisory committee for organizing this conference, and particularly this final fireside chat. I think like Jim Barnes stated in the beginning, agriculture 4.0 is on the rise, and digital technologies have shown a great potential and promise for working on agriculture development with farmers around the world, with supplying more information to support extension services, etc. But we need to also now seize this opportunity properly. And I think Sebastian Lesch, on behalf of the German government, said in the beginning, in the opening yesterday, the task is to harness this potential correctly and to use the potential of local outscaling that is in digitalization and the unprecedented technical possibilities we've ahead of us. And I think we've talked about some of these in this session. And the mission for some of us as donors and implementing agencies should now be to use this momentum in a way that it solves the problems we've touched upon, and that it solves it also in a way that it is equal. Mike Michener has reminded us that every agricultural revolution so far has been characterized by spreading innovation for productivity. So let's probably carefully review the digital revolution 4.0 now, how it will help overcome the most burning problems in agriculture. For example, the effective adaptation to climate change that has been also mentioned. And I think Agnes Calabata told us about some of the improvements and the way we've traveled, some from her experience, the setbacks in Africa, but also the large improvements also funneled by AGRA and other institutions. A lot has happened over the past years, but still a lot needs to be done. And the debate about modernizing agriculture in Africa, and Agnes Calabata mentioned this thing about mechanization. Is it good? Is it bad? And the kind of patrimonial way, how should modern agriculture look like? And wouldn't it be better for people to still plow with a hoe and hurt their backs instead of benefiting from modernization? I think there's still a lot to be debated, and not everybody's on board in embracing the opportunity of revolution and modernizing. And then I think we face a bit of political reality. I know most of us have been busy with the ICTforAg conference yesterday and today, and probably also with other things. But what also happened today was the launch of the third CADEP biannual review, the Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Programme. And I think what we heard today there is also a mixed picture. We have had the highest commitment and the best return on data. So congrats to all the member states of the AU who turned in data. It's been the best data outturn ever. But if you look at the backslide in inner African trade, I keep thinking to myself, what could digitalization help us do to increase and come to the Malabo target of tripling inner African trade and improve the market integration in Africa on agricultural markets? I think there's still something to do. And we see also some light at the end of the tunnel in terms of climate resilience and adaptation. So I think it's worthwhile looking also into that feedback at political level. And then, of course, we've heard from Matthias Berninger that we're facing this perfect storm. And I appreciate that the not just looming, but it's already here, the food price crisis. I mean, we've had since 2020, early 2020, increases in global food prices. And the latest developments are not going to help but to worsen this situation. I think a lot of us are pretty worried about that. And the entrepreneurial spirit that he mentioned could be one of the keys to help countries and target groups who need to benefit from it more than developing it for them. Lastly, I think Darren Asimoglu has summarized new technologies there to be used, but somehow agriculture has always been and remains a difficult sector. The contribution to climate change and the need to adapt, and the role agriculture plays for rural employment, and what will be the real opportunities and alternatives, we still have to work on that. And amidst all these challenges, I think we can still achieve a lot through increased collaboration like we're doing today, and by a coherent involvement of target groups and the people who work on day-to-day basis with agricultural farms, with cooperatives, with farm groups. And we should probably think about how digital applications and technology can help to ease their work a bit more. I think there was also consensus over the past 2 days that strengthening the principles for digital development is a good idea, and we should stick to them, not only to all the opportunities, but also have a look and a keen eye on what might be also threats. And data security, data sovereignty, I think there are some topics still to be debated in future. And lastly, Jim Barnett also mentioned in the beginning to think about to make agricultural digitalization and the revolution equitable. One topic I didn't hear, I think, enough in this session was the involvement of women in technology. I think strengthening research and advocating action on challenges that women face in using some of these technologies might deserve more attention, and so that we could use this technology opportunity wisely to empower women and also the agents who work with them. It's not about only technical solutions. They need to be accompanied by institutional and social innovations as well. And I would like to finish by concluding that I think the last 2 days have shown us that there is enough opportunity if what happened was that people came together all around the world, and that the conference has allowed for the much needed time to peer learn and to exchange on these topics. There were many good sessions, over 2,000 registered participants. And I think the challenge is now to keep the momentum, use this knowledge and the network on ICT4Ag amidst the challenges we've elaborated on and that are ahead of us. Some of us have mentioned already existing global food price crisis, the loss of progress in achieving SDG2. And I think we have to prove that Agriculture 4.0 will really help overcome these challenges. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Heffler. Appreciate that. Fantastic summary. I didn't know how you were going to sum all that up because we really did cover so very much. So I really do appreciate those closing comments. And I want to say thank you to all of the speakers throughout this session. These are challenging topics, but also reason to be optimistic about the future of the industry and creating a food system that is not only abundant, but also equitable and fair, and excited for the opportunities here. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Rachel Wangari, your MC, to close out not only today's session, but the conference entirely. Rachel?
Thank you, Tim, for moderating the session so well. And to all our panelists for that fascinating and insightful session. You have given us a lot to think about. The conversations we have had at ICT4Ag 2022 over the past 2 days have been truly engaging and inspiring, and have made the countless hours of work all worth it. With 27 insightful sessions, 91 discussion threads with nearly 6,000 messages exchanged, 28 virtual meetups where over 570 attendees are still engaging, this vibrant community of more than 2,100 participants has made ICT4Ag 2022 a tremendous success. I would like to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors, Feed the Future and the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ, through GIZ, and implementing partners, DAI and Intellecap. A special thank you to our featured session partner, Tetra Tech, and to all the wonderful organizations and speakers that worked with us to co-create sessions and help us spread the word as media and outreach partners. You helped us drive conversations and collaborations to solve some of the greatest challenges we face today. And last, but certainly not least, a big thank you to you, our community of participants, for your enthusiasm, support, and sharing our vision of a sustainable and resilient future. This isn't your last chance to connect with us, and we will keep our online platform open till next week. So continue networking and collaborating with others within our ecosystem. Don't forget to share your experiences and insights with us on social media using the hashtag ICTforAg 2022. And please do provide us with your valuable feedback so that we can come back next year even better than before. We hope you had a fantastic ICTforAg 2022 experience, and don't forget to stay in touch. We had a wonderful time hosting you. All the best from the entire ICTforAg team. Thank you, and have a lovely night and afternoon.